The Murder Scene podcast is a show that may contain graphic descriptions of violent acts, including those of a sexual nature and bad language. If you feel you may be adversely affected by such content, please do not listen. Listener discretion is advised. Not intended for children.
Hello and welcome to The Murder Scene, a podcast where we delve into the darker side of human nature to explore murders, missing persons, cold cases, serial killers, and all manner of strange, mysterious happenings that fall into the case file marked True Crime. I'm your host, Alex. So, hop into the back of my creepy white van filled with grey tarps and duct tape and let's go! The Murder Scene Podcast, Episode 3, Drain the Blood, Richard Chase, California Vampire Killer. Spree killer Richard Trenton Chase took just a month to chalk up his half-dozen murder victims. His media monikers were the Vampire Killer, the Vampire of Sacramento, and the Dracula Killer. But he was no Bela Lugosi. There was no black velvet Eastern European accent, no mesmerizing gaze from dark eyes, no sweet seduction. Just violence, just brutality, just death and depravity, insanity. Chase shot his victims dead, mutilated their corpses, drank their blood, cannibalized their remains, and committed necrophiliac sex acts with their dead bodies. But even worse than all that was what he did to a 22-month-old baby boy, which I won't go into here because, frankly, nobody really needs to hear that, and I don't really want to say it. Throughout his childhood and teens, he managed to keep up a facade, although a somewhat thin one, of being almost normal. He was a good-looking kid and even had a few girlfriends, but as he got older and the nature of relationships progressed to the physical, everything started to fall apart for Chase. He was impotent and unable to perform sexually for any of the girlfriends. None of them stuck around for very long after that revelation. He had some friends too, but even those close to him thought he was extremely strange. There was just something off about him. At one point, he lived in a shared apartment with some other guys, all of whom ended up leaving due to his unacceptable behavior, like walking around the flat and even the whole apartment complex totally naked. A couple of his roommates were members of a rock band, and they jammed in the apartment. Chase constantly interfered in these sessions, making it impossible for them to practice properly. New roomies came and went. Always went. Eventually, everybody had moved out, and he could no longer afford the rent on his own. He was a heavy drug user, constantly smoking weed and experimenting with psychedelics like LSD. Neither of these things helped his mental state. In his early teenage years, Chase took into his head that he was a badass outlaw who rode with the James Younger gang, the Wild West outlaw posse headed by Jesse James and his brother Frank. He found an old photograph he liked of the gang and pasted his own head onto the body of one of the members. He had posters made, and for some completely batshit reason, he thought this was a viable business idea and that people would want to purchase them. They didn't. Can't imagine why not. And in order to enhance his cowboy pose, he asked his mommy over and over and over to buy him a cowboy hat. She always said no. Chase's parents had a fairly volatile relationship. There was frequent bickering and yelling in the home, and Mom, Beatrice, Seems like she was a little bit on the paranoid side herself. On a family camping trip to Oregon, Beatrice accused her husband, Richard Sr., of having an affair with a woman she thought was hiding in the brush. She'd also previously accused him of drugging her so he could interfere with her sexually while she was sleeping. She accused him of infidelity with their neighbors. She accused him of using drugs. No wonder he was a drunk. Pamela Chase, Richard's little sister, later told of how hard her father was on Richard. She'd witnessed him shaking the boy, and even slamming him up against walls for the slightest error that displeased him. He was always screaming at his son. Both parents were big on discipline, and handed out punishments frequently to their kids. At just 2 years old, for some minor offense, Chase was force-fed by his dad until he threw up. Yes, it appears Chase's parents were a couple of arseholes. Thanks for nurturing a serial killer. Good job. Chase grew up to be a chronic hypochondriac. In one incident, he turned up at a local ER. He was there to find the people who stole his pulmonary artery. He also thought that the bones of his skull were protruding through the skin on the back of his head, even shaving it once, hoping he could watch them move. He thought that his stomach was the wrong way around. He also believed that his heart stopped beating at times, and sometimes his blood turned into powder. A psychiatrist diagnosed Chase with paranoid schizophrenia. Put that in the no shit Sherlock file. But that doctor believed it was a toxic psychosis caused by his drug addiction. The hospital staff made notes about Beatrice, reporting that she was highly aggressive and describing her as Chase's so-called schizophrenic mother. It had been suggested that he stay in the hospital after having been there for a 2-day observation period, but after Beatrice had a confrontation with the staff, they discharged him. They obviously didn't want to deal with her. Don't blame them. But with the medications prescribed to him by the doctors, Chase made a marked improvement over the next couple of years. He took his meds, ate well, and even gained around 20 pounds. But eventually he fell back into the dark world of street drugs. His progress halted, and he regressed back into schizoid episodes. Chase began his vampire psycho career by killing and eviscerating rabbits. He would eat their innards raw. Sometimes he fancied a bunny gut smoothie, though, and whizzed them up in a fucking blender. Gotta get that recipe. Chase believed that his heart would keep growing smaller and smaller until one day it would completely disappear. He figured it would be a good idea to get some extra blood pumping through his body, so he decided to inject rabbit blood into a vein and ended up in the hospital with a bad case of septicemia. He thought the reason he got sick was because the rabbit had drank battery acid. Eventually, his schizophrenia earned him a stay in the psych ward. It was not voluntary this time. This time he was committed. He was being plagued by somatic delusions, a symptom of many mental disorders that makes the sufferer believe that their body is different from others, deformed in some way, or doesn't function properly. Pharmaceuticals did nothing to stabilize or alleviate his condition. In 1976, he escaped from the psychiatric hospital and headed straight for his mother's house. She obviously wanted nothing to do with it and called the authorities immediately. This time, they put him in a psychiatric convalescent hospital named Beverly Manor. He quickly earned the nickname Dracula from the hospital staff because he'd go around the patients telling them stories about slaughtering animals and had been seen with blood on his lips. Dead birds would be seen laying outside his room window, their delicate, fragile necks broken, their bodies drained of blood. On top of all his other afflictions and issues, he clearly suffered from clinical vampirism, a mental disorder that manifests in a desire to drink blood, or an erotic fixation with blood or bloodletting. In some sufferers, it can be retraced to a childhood incident involving blood in some way. The disorder is now more commonly known as Renfield syndrome, named after Dracula's insect-eating, batshit crazy manslave, and coined by Richard Knoll, an American clinical psychologist, historian of medicine, and writer. He came up with the term with cynical derision of the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, and the state of psychology in general in America in the 1980s. But the name caught on and replaced clinical vampirism as a diagnosis. While I can appreciate his cynicism and contempt for his field at that time, so many psychotic murderers fit his criteria for Renfield syndrome. And while the joke may be on the psychology sector and its practitioners, I don't think the victims or their families would see the funny side. The syndrome may have been invented as a parody of 1980s psychobabble, but people have had their throats ripped out, their blood drunk, and their organs cannibalized nevertheless. Often, Renfield syndrome sufferers have zoophagia, a piggyback disorder where there is a desire to consume a living creature. This also comes with the risk of escalating from consuming animals to cannibalizing human flesh or organs. Unfortunately for 6 innocent people, Chase was declared no threat to the public and was released from the hospital. Chase's parents were granted a conservatorship over their son, a la Brittany Jean, and he was living alone. His mother paid the rent in his apartment and shopped for his food and other essentials, brought them to him. A while later, he was in a new apartment and began killing animals again. This time, it was pet cats, dogs, and rabbits that belonged to his neighbors. He even called one of the families whose pet dog was missing and told them exactly what he did to their beloved Pooch. It was around this time he began to collect firearms too. He was on medications while living by himself, but his mother, who I personally think had an issue or two, had the genius idea that her son didn't need his meds anymore and helped him wean himself off them. There's a time and a place for pharmaceuticals, and there's a time to get off as many of those as you can. This wasn't one of them. In 1977, the conservatorship over Chase expired. No one attempted to renew it. Now he was unmedicated, living alone, with nobody babysitting him. His mental state went into a rapid decline. On a visit to his mom's house, Chase killed her cat right in front of her and covered himself in its blood. Mother of the Year kept this little show to herself and never told another soul. Now he was beginning to do weird shit in public. He drove to Pyramid Lake in Nevada, an area entirely within the boundaries of the Pyramid Lake Paiute Tribe Reservation, where he was caught by police, stark bollock naked and covered with blood. He told the police that it was his own blood seeping out of his pores. He had several guns in the blood-smeared interior of his car, and a liver in a bucket of blood. Luckily, it belonged to a cow. This time. During this era, the Hillside Stranglers were menacing Los Angeles. Chase became obsessed with the case and was fascinated by the murderous duo of Kenneth Bianchi and Angelo Buono Jr., devouring every TV news report and newspaper article he could find. On the 29th of December 1977, Ambrose Griffin, a 51-year-old engineer and father of 2 boys, was shot and killed in front of his house while he and his wife emptied their car of the purchases they had made that afternoon on a shopping trip. It was a completely random drive-by shooting that claimed the life of Chase's first human victim. He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time when Richard Chase decided he wanted to kill somebody. But there were others. Witnesses who had luckily survived being shot at in the days following Ambrose Griffin's murder. There was even a .22 caliber slug found inside one of the near victims' homes, but the trail quickly went cold. Over the next few weeks, several people had odd and disturbing interactions with Chase. He started breaking into people's houses. He pissed into a drawer full of freshly laundered baby clothes, shit all over a kid's bed. On the 23rd of January, 1978, Teresa Wallen was just 22 years old and 3 months pregnant when cruel fate struck her. Richard Chase turned the handle on her door and found it unlocked. He later said that he took an unlocked door as an invitation to enter the home. If it was locked, he knew that he wasn't welcome and would leave. Teresa was about to exit her house with some bags of garbage just as Chase opened the door and entered. He shot her 3 times with absolutely no hesitation. He took a knife from the kitchen and rifled through her bag of rubbish and found an empty yogurt pot. He used it to drain the blood into, scooping it up from inside her body cavity, and drank it. No idea why he didn't just get a wine glass or a coffee mug or something like he got the knife in the kitchen. That's so strange, even for a psycho. The murder scene Teresa's husband came home to was something nobody should ever have to witness. Never mind a man who loved and cherished her deeply. That's something you never get over. How do you even function after that? How do you still go to work? Still shop for groceries and make dinner and sit there alone and eat? How do you even have the will to keep breathing? It was beyond Jack the Ripper level. The position of Teresa's body made it clear that she had been raped. One of her nipples had been sliced off. Her torso was a huge open gash and her internal organs had been taken out. She was repeatedly stabbed in one lung, her diaphragm area and her left breast. He removed her kidneys but put them back inside her body. And to add insult to injury, he put dog shit into her mouth. Oh my God, I can't even believe I just had to say those words. On the 27th of January 1978, just a mile or so from Teresa's house, 36-year-old Evelyn Miroth was minding her sister's 22-month-old son, David. A friend of the family, Daniel Meredith, was there visiting. Evelyn's 6-year-old son, Jason, was in the house too. A neighbor invited Jason to go on a trip with them to the snow. Evelyn said he would love to go, but that he had no appropriate shoes to wear. Daniel stepped in and said he would take Jason into town and shop for some appropriate footwear for him so he could go on the snowy trip. When Jason didn't arrive at the neighbor's house as expected, they sent their daughter over to the Miroth home to see where he had gotten to. When she arrived, she knocked on the door. Nobody answered, but she could see someone moving around inside the house. Eventually, some neighbors gathered outside. They thought they could see someone lying on the floor in the living room as they strained to see in the front window. They did. It was the body of Daniel, who Chase had dragged into the living room. He'd been shot in the head the moment he walked into the house again, back from a shopping trip with Jason. Evelyn was displayed in the same grotesque fashion as Teresa had been. She'd been shot to death too, and mutilated and defiled in the same way. Chase sodomized her, stabbed her several times in the rectum, which also punctured her uterus. He slashed at her throat. He even attempted to remove one of her eyes. There was also evidence at this murder scene that Chase had collected some of her blood and drank it. Jason lay dead on the floor next to his mum's bed. Chase had put 2 rounds into his head from his .22 caliber Stuger Luger pistol and killed him instantly. Once he was done, Chase stole Daniel Meredith's car from out front and drove away from the scene of his horrific crimes. When Karen Ferreira couldn't raise her sister on the phone, she turned up at her house to collect her son, David. There were police everywhere. She was frantic when she was told that her baby boy was nowhere to be found. He was missing, taken by the monster who just murdered her sister, her nephew, and Daniel. Inside the house, a crib contained a blood-soaked little pillow with a bullet hole in it. I'm not even going into the horrors of what he did to that baby. I wish I hadn't read it. I think it might be one of the worst fucking things I've ever heard of a serial killer doing. This was beyond Ramirez, beyond Dahmer, even surpasses the OG Jack the Ripper. Hardened, experienced detectives with a couple decades on the job were traumatized by the murder scenes in the Wallen and Meadoth houses. It was a level of brutality they had never experienced before. Robert K. Ressler was an agent from the FBI Behavioral Science Unit. He's credited with coining the term serial killer and was a pioneer in the art of profiling. He nailed it on Chase's profile. Along with colleague Russ Vorpagel, Ressler pegged Chase with the following traits: disorganized killer, white male, mid-20s, thin, undernourished, loner, single, lives alone, unemployed, drug user, paranoid psychosis, history of mental illness, slovenly, unkept residence, likely to have evidence of the crimes in his home. Like I said, fucking nailed it. Some eyewitnesses from the victims' neighborhoods came forward and relayed encounters they'd had with a man they believed might be Richard Chase. Coupled with the encounter Nancy Holden had with him, police were knocking on his apartment door within 24 hours. Nancy Holden was shopping at the Town and Country Village Shopping Centre, which was nearby both Chase's apartment and the Wallen house. She saw a frightening-looking man coming toward her in the store, who looked confused and disoriented. He was dirty and dishevelled. She tried to hurry away from him, but she stopped in her tracks, taken aback when he asked her a direct question. "Were you on the motorcycle when Kurt was killed?" Chase asked her. Kurt was Nancy's boyfriend in high school. He was killed in a horrible accident. Suddenly there was a spark of recognition, but couldn't put her finger on who he was, so she asked him. "Rick Chase," he told her. This surprised her. The Rick Chase she had known didn't look like this guy. That Rick Chase was a good-looking, clean-cut, well-dressed guy, a good student. But she had heard on the grapevine that he was using drugs these days. His dirty, stained clothes and his demeanour made her uneasy, and his anxious, fidgety disposition made her just want away from him as soon as she could. She bolted while he was still at the checkout paying for his items, but he followed her, caught up with her at her car and wanted her to give him a ride. There was no way he was getting in her car. She knew it was rude, but her instinct told her to bail. She jumped into her car and left him in her dust. Nancy's dad was a local cop at the time, and she saw a poster laying in his cruiser. She picked it up, looked at it, and she knew right away who it was. The man they were looking for, the monster who had committed all those murders, was her old classmate, Richard Chase. Now they knew who this murdering arsehole was, and all they had to do was go and pick him up and arrest him. Chase didn't answer the cops knocking on his door, so they pretended to leave and he made a run for it when he thought they'd gone. He was carrying a box that was full of blood-soaked rags, wearing a blood-stained jacket, and had Daniel Meredith's wallet in his back pocket. His apartment was disgusting. The air reeked of death and decomposition. The ceiling, walls, and floors were all spattered and smeared with blood. During the police search, they found pieces of bone, blood-stained items everywhere, pieces of animals laying next to human body parts and brain matter in storage containers in the fridge, like they were leftover cannibal snacks. And they were. Some of the human organs and tissues were determined to belong to Teresa, Evelyn, and baby David. His blender contained human remains. Chase would not confess to the murders despite all the evidence in his flat and on his person, only to killing a few neighborhood dogs. 3 pet collars were found in his apartment. One of the most chilling finds inside his apartment was his calendar. The dates that coincided with the Wallen and Miroth murders were marked with today. There were 44 more todays marked on it. Police also searched Moby Dearest's house. Predictably, she did not cooperate with the police and was completely in denial about what her son had been up to over the last month. She just wouldn't believe it. It wasn't until 2 months later that a church janitor found baby David's remains. Chase shoved his broken little body into a cardboard box and threw him behind a dumpster at the church like he was garbage. Chase's trial was moved 100 miles south to Santa Clara County after the defense requested a change of venue. Locally, it would have been almost impossible to find truly impartial people to make up the members of the jury due to the blanket coverage in the media and the horrific nature of the crimes. Chase's defense actually let him take the stand to testify. They entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. The prosecution studied hard, researching vampire lore and legends, and real historical vampiric figures like Vlad Tepes, also known as Vlad the Impaler or Vlad Dracula, the man Bram Stoker modeled his iconic immortal Count Dracula after. Their intent was to prove that even if Chase had a belief that drinking blood can increase vitality and even heal the human body of ailments and disease, as many cultures across the globe do, it was not a valid excuse nor reason to commit murder. Chase was evaluated by several psychiatrists after his arrest. He mentioned to one of them that he was disturbed by the murders he had committed and was scared that his victims may return from the grave to haunt him. At no time did he indicate that he felt a compulsion to commit the murders, nor to drink his victims' blood or eat parts of their corpses, only that he did it because he believed it would ease his suffering, take away all his pain. He also indicated that he knew what he had done was wrong. The jury deliberated for only 5 hours and delivered the verdict almost everybody wanted. Guilty on all 6 counts of first-degree murder with special circumstances. The special circumstances caveat is added to a charge when one or more of California's 22 specifications are met. In this case, they would be the crimes that involved rape, a drive-by shooting, and multiple murder cases part of the same trial. The jury took only an additional hour to declare that they had found him to be legally sane, and a further 4 hours to hand him the death penalty to die in the gas chamber at San Quentin Penitentiary. Robert Ressler, the FBI's BSU rock star, visited Chase several times after his incarceration to conduct a series of interviews. Chase told him that he had been ordered to commit the murders by the death rays which were directed at him from UFOs. That's a quote, by the way, from an FBI report. Ordered to commit the murders by death rays which were directed at him from UFOs. Yeah. Chase gave some papers to Ressler. He had written an appeal he considered filing, but never did. He went into great detail about a vast conspiracy around him that included all manner of players, including anti-Semitic Italian fascists, Nazis, a mafia underground, government corruption, 100-plus plane crashes, thousands of murder victims in the sewers around his neighborhood, and UFOs. Yeah, really. He detailed how the UFOs were communicating telepathically with him. They ordered him to murder his victims, apparently. They told him it would cure what ailed his blood that he thought was going to turn into a powder. On the 26th of December 1980, Richard Chase was found dead in his cell on death row. He had stockpiled his daily doses of tranquilizers and died of an overdose.
Thanks for listening. Go to themurderscenepodcast.com or at the Murder Scene Podcast on YouTube for all our social media links.